Hello and welcome back to my channel, Latveria Library, where I talk about everything comic book related. Today, I want to finally go over the history of Daredevil, Part 2. We are going to move into the 90s and go over some of the last stories before the soft reboot. But first, I know I said I didn't want to cover all of Frank Miller's run, because I don't want to spoil everything. But there are still some important moments that are heavily tied to Daredevil's future. I'll do my best not to spoil much. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And so, let's first talk about the first appearance of the Hand. The Hand was created by Miller and Janson and premiered in issue 174. The story begins in Paris when Elektra's bounty is killed by a ninja assassin from the Hand, an order of master assassins that trained her in the many ways of murder. She wondered what they were doing in Paris, and she thought they may be hunting her because she left the order. So she follows the ninja, and from the shadows, Elektra overhears the ninja's next target, an American lawyer living in New York named Matt Murdock. She hated Matt. They were enemies now because in previous issues, he had kept her from killing her mark. I go over that more in depth in my part 1 video. But she finds herself on a plane to New York anyway. Meanwhile, in New York, Matt has just gotten home. He's been working on a big case involving the criminal Gladiator. The case had been tougher than usual because his partner Foggy had cut ties with him and won't tell him why. Suddenly he hears 4 heartbeats in the room. Then his radar sense picks up their silhouettes. They had swords, and were moving so quietly he could barely pick them up. The 4 assassins realize that Matt is aware of them, and move to attack. The assassins are fast, but Matt is faster, and he takes all 4 of them out with ease. Before Matt could question them, they all start to dissolve, and the smell was so overwhelming, he moves to his bedroom to escape it, but finds another assassin dissolving. Someone had taken this one out, but who? Later on, we come to find out that the Hand had been moving into Kingpin's territory, and obviously Daredevil was still causing him trouble, so he decides to pin his enemies against each other. Through a third party, he had put out a hit on Daredevil's friend Matt Murdock and his client, which would put the Hand in conflict with Daredevil. The Kingpin had hoped all of them would just kill each other. Meanwhile, the Hand had followed Matt to his office, but Elektra had been following as well. She jumps them, and during the fight, one of the ninjas throws a grenade through Matt's office window. It explodes, and Matt wakes up in the hospital with his radar sense gone. While in the hospital, Elektra breaks Matt's client, the Gladiator, out of a prison transfer truck. She hands him his Gladiator armor, and they try to escape before the Hand arrives, but to no avail. The Hand were already there. Elektra and Gladiator were surrounded, but despite not having his radar sense, Daredevil shows up to help. Through complete concentration, he uses his other senses. He can hear their heartbeats and feel the wind from their sword swings. And finally, the 3 were able to hold them off. The Hand retreats, and so does Elektra. Gladiator thanks Daredevil and tells him about the woman with the sigh. Continued in issue 175, Daredevil finds Elektra and tells her about his radar sense. He asks for her help, but she tells him that he must really be desperate and that she doesn't care. He then figures the Hand will be going after Foggy to flesh him out, and he was right. Daredevil makes it just in time to stop 2 assassins from killing Foggy before he could even notice. The ninjas die but don't dissolve like the others. Daredevil searches his pocket and finds a card with an address on it. Elektra shows up and wants to check out the address, but Daredevil tells her that it's an obvious trap. Elektra tells him that this couldn't be the Hand because the ninjas didn't dissolve. Maybe it was somebody aiding her. So Elektra heads to the address on the card, and it was a trap waiting for her. She takes them all out with throwing stars, then heads to the back. She's greeted by 4 samurai, but she wasn't alone. Suddenly Daredevil jumps in out of nowhere. While Daredevil handles the samurai, Elektra moves on, but it wasn't long before she's greeted by the Hand's top assassin. He is said to have lived for centuries and cannot be killed by any mortal force. Elektra never believed it until she stabbed him through the heart. He didn't even seem fazed. The ninja restrains her with his rope knife, and the leader of the Hand, Jonin, appears before Elektra. He laughs, but she is able to break free and wrap her sash around the immortal assassin's neck, but to no avail. He cannot be killed. He escapes her grasp and disappears. Daredevil had finished his fight as well, and walks in on Jonin dead and Elektra standing over him. He calls her a murderer and says he's taking her in, but he passes out from loss of blood, and Elektra escapes. This story is just the beginning of one of the toughest and deadliest criminal organizations in the Marvel Universe. The Hand have not only been a Daredevil main villain, but have gone up against Wolverine, Spider-Man, and even the Avengers. This story also really expands the characters in Daredevil's bubble. We find out a lot more about Elektra, for one. Miller really fleshes her out and makes me at least want to know and see more of her. Also, we get a taste of what's to come from the Kingpin, how cunning he really can be. And also, I didn't talk about it much because I don't want to spoil everything, but we get some really good relationship building between Foggy and Matt. But this is just the beginning of the story. Through the Hand, we get introduced to Stick, Matt's mentor, in The Chase, which really helps the reader to understand why Daredevil's fighting skills are so unique and as strong as they are. This also leads into Elektra becoming Kingpin's bodyguard for a while, and a big battle between Bullseye and Elektra. But I don't want to spend a whole video on Miller. I just really recommend reading his Daredevil stories, especially Man Without Fear. Now, during the late 80s, right after Frank Miller's critically acclaimed run, writer Ann Nocenti took over with her own pretty solid run. Although it's not my favorite, it did have a few memorable moments, like moving Matt out of Hell's Kitchen and having him battle polluting companies and shadow agents of the government. She also created Typhoid Mary, which is probably my favorite story during her run. It starts on issue 254 in 1988. Typhoid Mary catches the attention of the Kingpin when she starts taking out some of the Kingpin's men to try and move up in the criminal underworld. He starts to study her past. Typhoid Mary was in and out of mental institutions all of her life. Because of her dissociative identity disorder, the Kingpin figured he could use this to his advantage and finally take out Daredevil. So after some aggressive negotiation, Mary finally agrees to break him down, emotionally and physically. She seduces Daredevil and attacks him, nearly killing him. Even though she failed, Kingpin keeps her on his payroll as a bodyguard. I mean, this story is fun and all, but the most important part is the creation of Typhoid Mary, because she plays a pivotal role in future Daredevil stories, which we'll go over later. For now, I want to go over the story Anne is most known for probably, and that is one of the last stories in her run. It starts in issue 284. Daredevil is so emotionally and physically spent from his recent battles that he completely loses his memories and starts to believe he is his father battling Jack Murdock. So while Matt starts a career as a boxer, one of his deadliest rivals, Bullseye, dons his Daredevil costume and identity to ruin the hero's good name. As Daredevil, he would steal and brutalize innocent people. But finally, none other than the Kingpin jogs Matt's memory when he tries to force him to take a dive during a fight. With his memories back and figuring out Bullseye has taken his suit, Matt takes revenge by taking Bullseye's costume. This confused Bullseye during their fight because he's mentally insane already. He couldn't remember if he was Daredevil or Bullseye. This is probably the weirdest Daredevil story I've ever read, and it even somewhat inspired season 3 of the Netflix show. Really, I don't have much to say about Ann Nocenti's run. And honestly, I didn't reread it before making this video because these two stories are probably my least favorite Daredevil stories. They really feel like Daredevil is a side character in his own story, in my opinion. He really has no growth or character development, other than losing his memory and becoming a boxer, I guess. But like I said, this is just my opinion. But this leads us into the 90s, in the beginning of the end of Daredevil Volume 1, with Dan Chichester's run and his Last Rites storyline. It starts in 1991 on issue 297. The Kingpin had done so much to Daredevil over the years, seemingly getting away with it every time. Daredevil is finally fed up and decides to break the Kingpin once and for all. But first, he needed to separate him from his right-hand woman, Typhoid Mary. So Daredevil seduces her and convinces her he's in love with her. And honestly, I love this. It's the same thing she did to him back during issue 255. He's giving her a taste of her own medicine, and it's great. What makes it even better is that you still feel for Daredevil, because he actually does have some kind of feelings for Mary's lighter half, and hopes she can forgive him. It's really such a good panel. He then abandons her in a mental hospital, and the last panel of the issue is Matt on the bathroom floor in tears. But the Kingpin, he won't get off so easy. Continued in issue 298, unfortunately Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. ask Murdock to lay off the Kingpin because he's been doing business with Hydra and Nick wants to nail them. But in order to do that, they need the Kingpin. But Matt is one of the most stubborn heroes in the Marvel Universe. He sneaks into the S.H.I.E.L.D. facility and goes through their computers to find any information on the Kingpin. But that was Nick Fury's plan all along. He hoped that while battling the Kingpin, he would expose Hydra's activities in the process. So Daredevil starts spreading the word around the criminal underworld that Hydra is controlling the Kingpin, which makes him look weak. He's supposed to be in control of everything that happens in New York, but this also exposes Hydra as well. Daredevil then visits Fury and tells him he knows what he's up to, and he will play his game for his own reasons, but to stay out of his way. Continued in issue 299, the seeds of doubt that Daredevil planted about the Kingpin are starting to spread to the higher-ups in the criminal underworld, and they're starting to think he isn't cut out to lead all of New York. Meanwhile, Daredevil takes the evidence of all the Kingpin and Hydra's activities to the DA. But while that is going on, Von Strucker and Kingpin both think the other is betraying their arrangement. So Fisk makes the first move and kidnaps Von Strucker, but Hydra comes to his rescue and mows down all of Kingpin's men and blows up every one of his property holdings. And from a distance away, Daredevil listens to it all happening and smiles. The story concludes on issue 300. Daredevil visits J. Jonah Jameson to try and convince him to run the Kingpin story on the front page of the Daily Bugle. It takes some convincing, but Jameson finally agrees. Meanwhile, the walls are closing in on the Kingpin. Hydra has hacked his computer and stole all of his money. They've blown up all of his property holdings, from his casinos to his brothels to his more legitimate spice warehouses. And the criminal underworld doesn't want anything to do with him. They won't back him up. When Fisk thinks things can't get any worse, the DA shows up with a search warrant. The story then cuts to Fisk on trial. The DA doesn't know if the jury sees Fisk for what he really is, but Daredevil tells her he knows what will. Meanwhile, Kingpin is contacted by a senator that tells him if he finds the person who murdered a certain taxi driver, his legal troubles will go away. It turns out that Kingpin's men had killed that taxi driver with one of Daredevil's billy clubs. He was going to save it for when he needed it to frame Daredevil for murder, and the time had come. But it turns out the whole plan with the senator was set up by Daredevil. He knew that the Kingpin had the billy club, and a fight between them breaks out. Luckily, Matt's able to catch himself and swing to safety. With the billy club still in his possession, Kingpin takes off to the subway station, but Matt's able to cut him off, and the fight begins again. Daredevil finally is able to grab the billy club from Fisk's hands and throws it in a nearby fire. Fisk dives for it, but it's too late. All the evidence that would frame Matt for the crime was burned off. After everything the Kingpin has done to him, Matt is finally able to let go of all the hate and tells Fisk he forgives him, but the words didn't come easy. This is the last really important story before Daredevil gets a soft reboot in the late 90s. I really like this story. It's kind of different than most Daredevil stories I've read. You can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I don't think there ever has been a story where Daredevil was so aggressive. Although he regrets a lot of his actions, he stops at nothing to completely break the Kingpin and his empire, and he barely has to throw a punch until the end of the story to do it. There really isn't a dull moment in this story. But I think this is a good stopping point for now. Next video we will get into the king of the nerds himself, Kevin Smith's soft reboot, and some of the stories that introduced me to the Daredevil character. I really hope you all enjoyed the video, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you did. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.